Hey everyone, this is Jelli. I just wanted to give you a little introduction into what this episode is. This is audio presented from a panel in September of 2024 at Anime Texas in Spring, Texas. It is one of the summer panels at conventions that we presented this year, and I just wanted to put it out there so everyone could get a feel for what it's like to attend one of our panels. The audio for this one sounded the best out of the 3 times we presented this panel, the other 2 being at Fan Expo Denver and San Japan in San Antonio. At the end of the panel, I spliced in the Q&A sessions from those 2 panels. I think you'll get a feel for, when you hear that, why I didn't want to release those as full episodes based on what the audio sounds like. That's just how things go sometimes when you're recording live audio. One sounds kind of blown out, and the other one, our microphones were essentially not even working. So things just don't sound good at all. Hope everyone enjoys listening to this and getting a feel for what it was like to be at one of our panels. There will be more of these in the future as I work our way through the rest of the audio from other panels we've given, and as we give more panels in the future. So please enjoy, and hopefully look forward to hearing more of these.
It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to a special live version of Final Forum, a podcast with a discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am not joined today by my usual co-host. It is due to him being on a very special mission for Lord Frieza that is very real and not at all related to him living on the opposite side of the country closing on a house. What we're going to do today is I've thrown together a presentation for Lord Frieza on the Dragon Ball movies, and I suppose you puny humans can hear it as well. And we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to go through what I'm doing here, why I'm sitting here talking to people, what movies specifically I'm talking about, because you can't just say Dragon Ball movies and have that cover everything I'm going to be talking about and nothing else. I'm going to contextualize the movies that I'm specifically talking about, and then I'm going to talk about value, what you can kind of take out of these movies that's maybe something people don't usually talk about, not just like good animation or bad animation and punching and fighting and that kind of stuff. So why am I up here? Why are we here? At Final Forum, we're just a couple of lifelong fans of the franchise who wanted to learn more about it. I'm actually a big, long-time kaiju movie fan. If you listen to the show, I try and sneak in a Godzilla reference almost every single episode, much to my co-host's chagrin. But over the years, I've been a fan of that. I've learned a lot about the directors, who they were, how they made their movies, why they made their movies, and it's just made me kind of see those movies in a different light, and I wanted the same for Dragon Ball. I wanted to take my fandom sort of to the next level and learn why Dragon Ball became what it is. And so to that extent, to that end, I decided the best way to take me from being just a fan to someone who knows a little bit more about it would be to have a podcast and keep myself on task. And so we use these books here, this series of books, Dragon Ball Culture by an American Dragon Ball scholar, Derek Padula, to delve into the history, the inspirations, It's a, like, right now 6-book series with a 7th on the way, where he goes through Dragon Ball, just the Dragon Ball portion, and talks about all the different inspirations, all the different cultural references behind Dragon Ball, and kind of figures out why it turned out the way it did and how it turned out the way it did. And so I'm going to be a little bit more focused in on the original Dragon Ball movies, but I used these, like, the insights that Derek has in these books to kind of look at the franchise in a different light and build this presentation today. He doesn't talk about anything that's, at least so far in his books, anything that's anime only, that's filler. So I'm using that sort of, like, his mindset as a springboard for these conversations. So what movies do I mean specifically? Because unfortunately, you can't just say Dragon Ball movie and have that cover a very specific thing. I'm going to be focused on the first 16 movies that were released during the run of the actual show. The movies that came out of what was called the Matsuri festivals. I'll be talking about those more in a minute. But so what that means is that I will not be talking about the biggest exception to that is I won't be talking about Path to Power. That was released under the same sort of strategy as these 16 movies over here on the left, but it really is just sort of a anniversary celebration film. It doesn't have a whole lot different to it than is in the show or the manga. And then also, I'm not going to be talking about Battle of Gods, Resurrection F, Broly, Superhero, because those movies were released the same way you would release any other animated film in the world today. And the whole point of this presentation, the whole point of this panel was to sort of reframe the conversation around those 16 movies, because if you listen to a lot of Dragon Ball podcasts like I do, since I run one, you will hear people say a lot of times, I can't imagine what seeing this in a theater was like. I can't imagine how I would have felt seeing this in a theater. I can't imagine Toei thought this was a good idea to put this movie in a theater. And that's not really the right mindset to have with these movies. I'm also not going to be talking about the TV specials because they're TV specials and not movies. Also, I'm not going to be talking about Dragon Ball Evolution because we just know that one's bad. So let's contextualize these movies a little bit. Before we do that, we just need to talk about the Toei Manga Matsuri. And before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Toei Animation. They were established in 1948 as Japan Animated Films by Kenzo Masaoka and Sanae Yamamoto. They made little short films that would premiere before movies. They made their first theatrical short in 1957 called Kitty's Graffiti. It's that one over on the left there. They were pioneers, Toei, in the anime industry. They released the world's first color anime film in 1958 called The Tale of the White Serpent, later released in 1961 in the US under the title Panda and the Magic Serpent. It was the second anime film ever released in the United States. In 1963, they launched their first anime series called Wolf Boy Ken under the direction of Isao Takahata, who, if you recognize that name, he is a Studio Ghibli co-founder, director of Grave of the Fireflies and Pompoko, among a bunch of others. That same year, in 1963, Toei released a movie called Wan Wan Chushingura, or Doggy March. At the time, their practice was to put these movies in theaters with samurai films because their theatrically released anime were considered prestige pictures, and they wanted something prestigious to play along with it. So they would use these samurai films that they called jidaigeki. Under the urgings of the director of Doggy March, Daisaku Shirakawa, they tested out running Doggy March with a 2-episode compilation of Wolf Boy Ken. Shirakawa believed that an animated film should be paired with an animated B feature. And Toei was like, I don't know, no one's going to want to go and see in theaters what they've already seen on TV. They saw a marked increase in revenue when they paired Doggy March with these episodes of Wolf Boy Ken, and they realized, hey, if we put anime movies into theaters with other animation, we can make more money. That's the birth of what they called the Toei Manga Matsuri. Incidentally, both Doggy March and Wolf Boy Ken feature in-between animation done by none other than Hayao Miyazaki. So the Toei Manga Matsuri begins in 1967 officially, after having its sort of brainchild start in 1963 as a way to showcase their popular anime series based on manga alongside theatrical films during breaks in the Japanese school year. So your summer, your winter, your spring. They would, at this time, this is the earliest emergence of the genre in Japan in terms of any widespread popularity. And the term anime doesn't even really exist at this point. A lot of directors, if you look at directors who directed movies during this time, they didn't call them anime. They called them manga. They were just considered animated manga. That's where this is called the Toei Manga Matsuri instead of the Toei Anime Matsuri. It's just the naming conventions at the time. The term anime didn't even really exist. The festival becomes fully established and an integral part of Toei's culture in 1969 with the release of Puss in Boots. It's called The Wonderful World of Puss in Boots, which gives Toei its mascot Perrault. They use that you can see on the bottom left there. If you know what Toei's logo and mascot look like, that's you can see Perrault in there. Again, very important animators worked on Puss in Boots, notably Hayao Miyazaki, who noted that the film has a parapet sequence that was a major influence on his movie Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro. So the festival itself is a 2-week to 1-month event where a double, triple, or quadruple bill would play, lasting around 3 hours, targeted towards children. Some offerings would splice together a 3 to 4 episode arc of a show that would like a little more story driven that would run 60 to 90 minutes, and others like Dragon Ball would offer new content that would highlight basically just what was happening in the anime around the time, as a way to get kids into a show that they might have missed up to that point for whatever reason, and also a way to sell merchandise, programs, toys, posters, other collectibles. These were like anime Matsuri exclusives that could be bought at the theaters and that were screening these movies. This is like popcorn bucket collecting culture before popcorn bucket collecting culture was a thing. Every Dragon Ball movie until 2013 premiered at one of these festivals, though in 1990 it was renamed the Toei Anime Fair, as programming for the festival split their live-action tokusatsu portions of the festival into the Toei Superhero Fair. So they would historically, they would take like Ultraman and take like 3 episodes of Ultraman, compare it with 3 episodes of Dragon Ball, with a Dragon Ball movie rather, paired with like 3 episodes of, I don't know, one of their anime shows that was running, and that would be their bill. They split off the Ultraman into its own fair for a while. To this day, they still have the Toei Manga Matsuri, or the Toei Anime Festival. It's only once per year now. It's in April, and it brings in several billion yen in revenue for them every year in box office receipts alone. So you can imagine what else they get with all their collectibles. It's hard to find out a whole lot about the history of these festivals if you don't speak Japanese. I've found a couple of articles, but they are pictures, not even PDFs, in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese, so I couldn't translate them. But if you look at the state of cinema, especially in Japan in the 60s and 70s, you can kind of figure out why these started. Aside from just being smart timing decisions, the festivals were a great way for people to see things that they had missed, because home video was not widely adopted until the mid-'80s. So if you missed something on TV, you wouldn't be able to watch it on VHS typically, because most people didn't have a VHS player in their homes. So they would also not really run reruns very often, because a Japanese television show that would run for a full season would produce upwards of 45 episodes per year. I actually did a whole panel on filler and why filler is necessary, and that's because they were making 48 episodes of Dragon Ball every single year. If you look at stuff like Ultraman, they were making 51 episodes of Ultraman every season. So there's no time to run reruns because you're filling up your calendar with new stuff constantly. As VHS becomes more widespread, you shift your strategy a little bit to bring in new and exclusive content, because now why go see something in a theater that you could watch on VHS? This is like the inspiration behind the Dragon Ball philosophy, is let's make something new, bring in new fans, and then who haven't seen anything, and it could be like a self-contained fun little adventure for them, but let's also bring in the current fans who want to see something new. The question though is like, why? Why do this? And of course the answer is money. In the 1960s, the golden age of Japanese cinema was over, and the Japanese film industry was in decline. You might even say free fall. The growing popularity of television, which was spurred largely by Ultraman in Japan in 1966, was a huge part of that. But audience sizes were down to about a third of what they were at their peak the decade prior, and the four major studios in Japan were reeling. Their four big studios are Daiei, Toho, Nikatsu, and Toei. Daiei filed for bankruptcy in 1971, permanently shelving films that were in development and shifting ownership of some of their biggest franchises and leaving the studio in a weird limbo for decades where they would actually produce movies but not release them. They would give them off to their competitors to release. And this was the case with Daiei until they were finally purchased in 2002 by Kadokawa. So for 31 years, Daiei Studios was in this weird limbo where they would sometimes make movies but never actually release them. Nikatsu resorted to distributing softcore adult films during this because they needed money. So these Matsuri helped to keep Toho and Toei afloat during this time by being able to put out compilation movies and low-budget new releases that would give them a foothold in the theatrical space and allow them to maintain their philosophy without having to go bankrupt or, distribute adult entertainment. And also, it lets them put out movies which are much more likely to be picked up for distribution internationally than a 51-episode TV show. And again, it all boils down to money. With repackaging movies, you could make something new for pennies on the dollar, slap together something that already existed, edit down an old feature, which Toho did a lot. Toho would take their 90-minute Godzilla movies and edit them down to an hour to show to kids. And you could keep the lights on. You could keep people employed. With the Dragon Ball movies, they took existing story arcs a lot of times and just kind of give them a little bit of different animation or a new character designs and kind of shove those things together and make these sort of what-if scenarios. And you could make something cheap and make a lot of money. And how much money are we talking about? That's why I got the Simpsons thing up there. The Dragon Ball movies would make roughly 1.5 billion yen every time they came out, which is the equivalent of about 11 million US dollars. Adjusting for inflation, this is like 28 to 30 million dollars. So if you look at the Dragon Ball Z movies, it's about the same. You're making about $30 million. That equates to, and if anyone wants to do the math and check it, you're more than welcome to bust out your phone. It's $200,000 for a 30-second ad spot on The Simpsons. There's like 8 to 9 minutes of commercials every episode of The Simpsons. That's $3.5 million in ad revenue. A 3-hour programming block of The Simpsons would be 6 episodes and would bring in $21 million. So you're putting together a 3-hour programming block of Matsuri stuff that costs way less than 3 hours of The Simpsons, and you're bringing in 30% more money than The Simpsons brings in. On top of that, the movies act as advertising for their shows. So you're putting an advertisement it's not a paid advertisement into theaters. It's an advertisement that people are paying you to go see. Makes a lot of sense financially. So when I talk about value, for me, as like just a fan of all this stuff, there's tons of value. As I've done more and more episodes of the show, we've learned about people like Daisuke Nishio and Chiaki Imada and Toshiki Inoue and Takao Kayama and a whole lot more. And I've dug into their careers and found a lot of really cool properties outside of Dragon Ball that I enjoy now. Nishio worked on my favorite segment in Halo Legends, if you're familiar with that. It's the one where that feels like Dragon Ball. It's the one with the really dumb Spartan who like falls out of the plane and he gets stuck on a planet and then he's running around. It's like a Dragon Ball episode in Halo's universe. It's awesome. He also worked on Gegege no Kitaro. Gegege no Kitaro is an excellent show about yokai in Japan. There's a current-ish version that ran from like 2018 to 2023, I think. It was really, really good. Chiaki Imada, he's the one who strove to make Toei Animation an internationally viable company, and he's the one who said, hey, we should be an animation company if our name is Toei Animation and get this superhero and Sentai stuff out of the animation space and focus on animation. And then he and others also worked on Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider is awesome sometimes. There's a show on Amazon Prime called Kamen Rider Black. It goes hard. And when I say it goes hard, I mean it is one of the most ANCAP shows I have ever seen. And also the very first scene features 2 children being experimented on by scientists and tortured. And the showrunner is like, I can't wait for kids to discover this show. Kamen Rider is insane. Also, I've learned that a descendant of Vitus Bering of the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait provided musical cues for one of the movies, the first one. So what? Because that all seems well and good, and it's great for me as like a fan to get that kind of stuff out of it, or as like a super fan and a nerd. But what about like a more casual fan? Because you could probably find cool filmmakers that worked on any Matsuri film and in any movie in general. That's where we dig even deeper. We make some we make some extrapolations and connections to things I've learned about Dragon Ball over the years and Toriyama and the crews behind making these. And I'm going to highlight a bunch of really interesting things, I think, from the 3 original Dragon Ball movies and then the 13 Dragon Ball Z movies. So with Curse of the Blood Rubies, you've got this movie suffers from something that Dragon Ball itself was subjected to a lot in its early years, and which some old fans even remember fondly, and that's censorship. If you've been into the franchise for a long time, you know about the Home for Infinite Losers, or HIFL. If you haven't been in the franchise for a long time and you're only familiar with it more recently, characters in Hell wear shirts that say Hell across their chest, and they were edited to say HFIL so that little kids wouldn't see the word Hell. This movie is a rarity among the Dragon Ball movies because it actually came over to the US fairly early, and so it actually was edited. A lot of the other Dragon Ball movies have only ever been seen unedited. This was before they understood that cartoon didn't necessarily mean for babies, and so they edited it. Anything lewd was censored, including Roshi's nosebleed and all the crude humor of the movie, so they edited out several minutes of the film. It wasn't until 2010 that Funimation did an in-house dub, and the movie was seen unedited in the US for the first time. The movie that makes this movie sit out among those original 3 Dragon Ball films for audiences in the 2020s, because if you start here and you watch this one, you hear the Funimation dub that you're used to hearing. You hear all the voices that you're used to hearing from the show. And then if you watch the very next movie, Sleeping Princess and Devil's Castle, the voice cast is completely different. Goku sounds very weird. They all sound a little bit off and a little bit weird. It's because it's a completely new dub that was done in 2010 versus all the other ones were done in the very early 2000s and late 90s. Toriyama has said in interviews over the years, I'm sure a lot of people know, that he would decide a character's camp or category, what their name would be, and then base every other character in that camp and category on puns in that oeuvre. So the anime team picks up on that a lot, and especially in Curse of the Blood Rubies, but they stick with the food puns here. So you get the main character is named Guramis, which is adapted from the word gourmet. At this time in Japan, there was a gourmet food boom, and so the word is adapted into Dragon Ball to reflect the trends of the time. He can only eat fancy food. That's why he's named Gourmet. Vango, a character in the movie, is named after vongole sauce, which is a topping for pasta, typically linguine. It's made with clams, and clam sauce is most often white, but it can be red. In the dub, he's named Bongo, so you lose that potential pun because they're just trying to match the lip movements. Pasta, that should be a pretty obvious one. And then there's Pansy, a.k.a. Penny, most likely derived from the flowers because the movie has a very strong environmental message to it. In another example of the animation crew taking up Toriyama's proclivities and his references that he liked to put down, they designed the driver of Pasta's Jeep to look like Kato, as portrayed by Bruce Lee in The Green Hornet, because Toriyama loved Bruce Lee, so let's get a Bruce Lee reference in there if we can. Next up, we've got Sleeping Princess in Devil's Castle. Right here, you've got Lucifer is the name of the vampire. This is obviously a reference to Satan, who was Lucifer before he was cast out of heaven, but it's another pickup by the anime team of one of Toriyama's tendencies, which is specifically opposites clashing. Lucifer means light bringer, and the Lucifer of this film wants to destroy the sun, so he's trying to destroy the sun. He's not the light bringer, he's the light remover. Toriyama would do that kind of stuff all the time. He would bring up a thing that people would recognize, and then he would do the exact opposite of it. Specifically, like a good example is he would bring up the Bancho fan, and in Journey to the West, the Bancho fan is this mystical fan that can put out any fire and any flame. He has it show up in his show, and it doesn't work at all. That's a very Toriyama-esque thing to do, is to bring up something that people would be familiar with and then subvert the expectation. Or to name something like to name something in a certain way and then have it be the complete opposite. So like Tao Pai Pai, his name is Peach White White, is what it translates to. And it's supposed to be a peaceful name. It is actually a name that works as a Chinese name. And then obviously Tao Pai Pai or Mercenary Tao is like one of the most evil people in the show. So that's a Toriyama-ism. The Hunchback character is based off of Fritz from like Frankenstein, or Igor from Son of Frankenstein. The stereotype is pretty well known of a hunchback helping a mad scientist with his works. The only other character of note in this movie, aside from the ones that we already know, is a character named Gastel. Gastel's the red demon with the horns and the red ribbon. For starters, his name is a Wasaiego term taken from gasateberu, which translates to gas table, which basically is just a Japanese colloquialism for a stove burner. Wasaiego is a term for borrowing English words in Japanese, but only for use in Japan, and they only mean things in Japan. So, for example, they have a phrase called handurakipa. Handurakipa means handle keeper. That's nothing. Nobody has ever used the phrase handle keeper in English anywhere ever. In Japan, it's how they refer to a designated driver. It's now how I refer to a designated driver, but that's only me. That contrasts with, they can borrow loan words at times. They call it gairego. You'll be familiar with like buruma means bloomers. That's just how they say bloomers in Japanese, and bloomers means underwear. So gas table is like, no one says gas table, but people say stove burner. So they borrow English words to just make up their own phrases sometimes. Gastel, beyond being a punny Dragon Ball name, is based on Prince Nezha, who's a Chinese deity that appears in Journey to the West and does battle with Sun Wukong. Now, if you don't know what Journey to the West and Sun Wukong are, Journey to the West is just a Japanese, it's like considered Japanese. It's considered China's oldest novel, and it's the springboard for a lot of anime. So if you like look up Journey to the West, you'll notice a lot of things about it that appear in probably just about any shonen anime you've ever seen. But Sun Wukong then translates in from Chinese to English, it translates as Sun Wukong. From Chinese to Japanese, it translates as Son Goku. So that's where Toriyama springboarded from Journey to the West for Dragon Ball, actually. Nezha, as he appears in Journey to the West, is a mixture of a pair of Hindu deities, Nalakalavra, who is a yaksha or a nature spirit, who most often appears as a sexual trickster, and the child god Krishna, one of the most important Hindu deities, often worshipped as an avatar of Vishnu or the supreme god in his own right. Prince Nezha's backstory is a complex and intricate one, but his pertinence to the movie lies mostly in his design. In traditional Chinese culture, Nezha is said to fly around on a pair of fire wheels. And you could see here in this little relief, I don't know if you can see it that well, but he's flying on a couple things, and you see Gastel flying around on fire. He also is said to constantly have his red armillary sash with him in battle, and Gastel has this pink ribbon with him all the time. So you can see from all that where where Gastel's design quirks come in. It's from this character from Journey to the West, and all of this in a character who's in like 5 minutes of a 45-minute cash grab movie. I think that's pretty neat. This brings us to mystical adventure. Minoru Maeda was inspired by the 1987 film The Last Emperor when designing Chaozu's costume for the movie, and you can see like they almost look one-to-one right here. The movie The Last Emperor tells the story of Pu Yi, the final emperor of China, before a series of wars and invasions forced him from the throne, and ultimately the ascent of Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party ended the Chinese monarchy entirely. Pu Yi was a real person who became emperor at the age of 2.5 when he got a knock on his door that his uncle had died, an uncle he never knew in life, and was ripped away from his family and named the Divine Emperor of China. He was an unruly child and a cruel emperor, with only his wet nurse able to calm him from his unusually cruel punishments that he'd hand out to his servants, such as baking iron fillings into cakes and making them eat them. He was just out of control. When you become the emperor and considered divine and a deity at the age of 2, all of your worst whims just become habits and things that you just want to do, and nobody ever disciplines you. And that's what happened to him. It was only later in his life that his English tutor, Reginald Johnson, wound up becoming revered by the young emperor, and he was able to calm him down and get him to be a little less sadistic. It's rumored that Puyi never consummated his marriage and that he only married due to the commands of the tradition, and in fact, he might have been homosexual. The parallels and inversions here with Chao Tzu and the way he's portrayed are actually pretty interesting. Chao Tzu is also a child, and he's a child emperor, and he's, of course, dressed like Puyi, and he also gives no indication of really being interested in women, and his closest friend is Tien, who is like his mentor and his advisor and his tutor. But then there's the inversions. Chao Tzu is friendly, he's kind, he's innocent, he's not really interested in violence. This is a very Toriyama kind of thing to do, albeit in a project where Toriyama wasn't involved. You take something familiar and you present it to people in a new way so as to make it seem almost unfamiliar. Another Toriyama-esque thing here in this movie is Chao Tzu's wife, which turns out to be a doll named Ronron. That's the Japanese onomatopoeia for skipping along happily and humming a bouncy tune. So the joke, of course, being that the name sets the expectation that Ronron would be a happy, bouncy, fun person, probably even happier and bouncier than Chao Tzu and more bubbly, and then it turns out to be a lifeless doll. Cue the pratfall. The mystical adventure also features the Mifan Empire. The Mifan Empire's name is a pun based on the Mandarin reading of the word rice in kanji, which links to the Chinese food pun names of Tian Xin Han and Chao Tzu, and like I mentioned, Tao Pai Pai. Tao Pai Pai is it's an actual Chinese name, but it translates to peach, white. The Mifan Empire is the setting for the tournament of the film, and it's obviously based on the setting from the prior tournaments, which is to say Bali, where Toriyama took a trip that inspired a lot of the design of the tournament space. Additionally, Minoru Maeda said he designed the architecture, as you can see on the left there, off the Forbidden City in China. And the clothing worn by most people are of the type worn by Imperial Chinese commanders. So we've got a blending of cultures and cross-cultural breeding going on here, especially when you consider a lot of the statues that are around in this movie look like Hindu deities. This is a very Toriyama-esque thing to do because Dragon Ball is a wuxia, which is specifically, you'll notice a lot when I start talking about wuxia, you'll be like, oh, that's Dragon Ball. Wuxia is defined by stories set in a fantasy world very similar to China, but explicitly not exactly China. A world inhabited by monsters with secret communities of martial artists who spawn a young idealistic hero who trains with a master, uses ki in intense battles. Characters face off against death and conquer the villains by showing them pity and mercy. That's Dragon Ball, and that's wuxia. So that's where like the genre of Dragon Ball kind of comes in. So getting into the Dragon Ball Z movies, I'm running up against time a little bit, but I got 13 movies in 9 minutes. I can do this. So you've got the Dead Zone. Garlic Jr. is the first character who transforms on purpose for a power boost. And when I talk about transform, I don't just mean bulk up. I mean Garlic Jr.'s monster form looks like a completely different character from his tiny form. He's the first person in all of Dragon Ball to do that, to have a transformation on purpose for a power boost and keep his original personality. Because you've got Oolong and Puar, they transform, but they don't get a power boost. You got Master Roshi bulking up, but it's not really a transformation. And you've got Goku's Uzaru form, but he doesn't keep his personality. He goes ballistic. So that's Garlic Jr.'s claim to fame there. Also, the Dead Zone itself could be inspired by the Phantom Zone from Superman comics. It first appeared in the 1960s, but it gained a lot of popularity via Richard Donner's Superman 2 in 1980. So if you think about how long it takes for a movie to go from America to Japan to become popular, to become a thing that people are thinking about, to then make a movie, this movie was made in the mid-'80s. They're thinking at the time, oh, hey, that Superman movie that was popular had like a phantom zone, a dead zone, a weird thing that people could get trapped in. Let's do that too. So that's where that potentially comes from. Moving on to the world's strongest, the Biomen in the movie that you can see up there. They resemble the creatures from the movie This Island Earth, and Toriyama loved to reference 50 sci-fi movies throughout his manga. There's also Dr. Wheelo. Wiro is a Japanese cake and a Nagoyan specialty. The design itself then features a lot of similarities from HAL 9000 from 2001, with that red eye in the middle. And there's even throughout the movie, there's like a lot of close-ups on it right when Dr. Wheelo is talking, and it just looks a lot like HAL. This movie also employs the brain in a jar trope, one of the earliest uses of which is the H.P. Lovecraft story The Whisperer in the Darkness, and a potential source of inspiration for this movie's plot is the 1968 B movie They Saved Hitler's Brain, though Hitler doesn't get an awesome robot body to fight people in that movie. That's Wolfenstein. As for Tree of Might, the movie marked the animated debut of Goku wearing his own symbol, his Go symbol, on both the front and back of his gi. That would not debut in the TV series until it aired in Japan 2 months later. So this is the first time people ever saw that gi for Goku. And then also we've got plenty of name puns throughout the movie because there's more Saiyans or Saiyans, especially Turles. That's a pun on the Japanese word for lettuce, which is ratasu, and it's made by flipping the syllables. So instead of ratasu, it's turesu. That's a thing that Toriyama would do a lot, actually. He did it notably in Dr. Slump. The main antagonist of Dr. Slump is Dr. Masharito. That's his editor, Torishima, with the syllables flipped around. And Masharito is designed to look exactly like Torishima. That's Toriyama getting some revenge on his editor for being mean to him. Turles is also not Goku's brother, despite the long-standing confusion. It's actually stated in the movie that the Saiyans of that rank and power level tend to look the same. I'm not a huge fan of that explanation, but for a long time, people thought they were brothers. They're not actually brothers. And then the Tree of Might itself could be a reference to the idea of a tree of life, as seen in a whole lot of religions and mythologies the world over, especially with the fruit being a power-up. That could be a possible reference to the fruit of life, or even the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Then there's Lord Slug. Most notably, Lord Slug was intended to be the animated debut of the Super Saiyan form, but Toriyama had not incorporated the form into the manga even yet at this point. And when he ultimately did so, he decided to change it a bit, and so this form becomes known as Pseudo Super Saiyan or False Super Saiyan. It shows that the true intention from the very outset was that Goku's hair would stand straight up when achieving the Super Saiyan form. But one thing that's become pretty well known over the years is that Akira Toriyama was incredibly, I'll say lazy, I guess, but he was a very, very bad procrastinator. And when it came time for the chapter in which Super Saiyan debuts, he ran up against the deadline and decided not to color in the hair and made it blonde because it was easier to do and he could get it in under the deadline. So the reason that Super Saiyan is blonde is because Akira Toriyama ran out of time. In the wake of the popularity of Frieza, the Dragon Ball brings us Cooler's Revenge. The name Cooler probably you would think comes from the following of the Frieza race's cold naming scheme, but actually when they were making this movie, they didn't know that there was like going to be a King Cold and a Frost and all those characters. So Cooler's name actually comes from the phrase Meshi Damokura, which means let's chow down in English. So the anime staff was going back to the food puns again because Launch, as we know her, is actually named Lunch. And she also has like a nickname that's like something something something, and it means like let's eat lunch. So as for Cooler's design, though, while Toriyama played with the alien xenomorph for one of Frieza's strong forms, this design is referencing the Predator. After Cooler's Revenge, we get the return of Cooler, where he's even coolerer with Meta Cooler. And we learn throughout the movie that Meta Cooler is connected to an AI known as the Big Getty Star. Getty comes from the word Getimono, which means cobbled together. It's an appropriate name considering the Big Getty Star begins as a small microchip and throughout the movie somehow brings more and more pieces of derelict technology into itself until it becomes the size of a planet. This thing looks a lot like the Death Star, which is unsurprising given how often Toriyama has referenced Star Wars and even the Death Star itself. And in execution, it mimics a couple of Star Trek things, namely the Borg Cube, which is also like a hive-like assimilated swarm, and V'ger from the first Star Trek motion picture, which was the satellite Voyager that became sentient and serves as the thrust of the plot of the film. In addition to that, the movie shares a lot of plot similarities with the Doctor Who serial The 10th Planet from 1966, which, if you're familiar with this movie, it features a race of Cybermen invading the Earth, stealing its energy to replenish the energy of its own planet, Mondus, only for Mondus to be destroyed and thus wiping out its invasion force in the process when it absorbs too much energy, which is like the exact plot of this movie. Super Android 13 is pretty thin on cultural references in the movie itself, at least from what little I did to kind of look into that one. I will do a deeper dive someday in the future, but the movie makes an indelible mark on internet pop culture. An insult from Android 13 towards Trunks in the dub of the movie, which is "Don't lecture me with your $30 haircut," gained meme status in 2020 and 2021 when we were all sitting stuck in our houses, and it becomes popular enough that there's a website launched in 2022 called "Don't Lecture Me with Your $30 Website," which is like a meme generating website basically. Keeping on the theme of memes, in Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan has had an impact on Japanese meme culture. Throughout the course of the movie, Broly and Paragus ultimately speak every known syllable in the Japanese language, which allows Japanese meme makers to pull clips at random and get Broly and Paragus to say literally anything they want. The Japanese memes of Paragus are insane. They make absolutely no sense to me. I threw a screenshot of one up there. I don't know what the hell is happening in that. They're madness. Furthermore, from this movie, there's a couple characters named Angol and Moa. This is named after Anglemois, which is a term coined by the by the philosopher and prophecy maker Nostradamus. Nostradamus enjoyed a bunch of waves of popularity in Japan, actually, one of which coincided roughly with the production time of this movie. So the writers were playing with something that was in the zeitgeist at the time. In BoJack Unbound, BoJack has a whole bunch of henchmen. Their names are all derived from words meaning things like unjust, cruel, heinous, and other character flaws. And BoJack himself is named for the words for audacity and arrogance. His appearance is akin to a swashbuckling pirate, which fits with a pre-established Toriyama affinity for Toshiro Mifune films, specifically The Lost World of Sinbad or Samurai Pirate, from which he likely borrowed elements for both Roshi and Baba. There's two characters in that movie who are almost exactly Roshi and Baba. It's like an old crazy witch who is nasty and a perverted hermit master who is into turtles. It's like the same characters. Also, there's the character Udo, who appears in the tournament portion of the movie. He looks like he's based on Stan the Lariat Hansen, who was a pro wrestler whose greatest success came while he was wrestling in Japan. It would not be the first time that Dragon Ball referenced a wrestler. They reference Andre the Giant, Dick the Destroyer, Bayer, George the Animal Steel, Bastion Booger, and others. So this is the anime staff picking up on a Toriyama-ism. In Broly's Second Coming, we've got the movie is most notable actually for being probably the most profitable movie of the Matsuri run. It made $50 million, so almost twice what all the other ones did. And it actually kept production costs even lower because it reused animation from the previous Broly movie. The character Coco, we might think was named after chocolate, but actually she's from the village Natade. So she's actually named after nata de coco, which is a gelatinous fermentation of coconut water that's a dessert that's from the Philippines. And then also in this sequence where Goten is imagining what he would wish for, you can see in the corner there Arale from Dr. Slump and the Toribot. The Toribot is a cartoon Toriyama drew of himself so that he would not have to submit pictures of himself to his magazines, his manga, because he hated that people knew what he looked like. He was notoriously a hermit. He hated bumping into people. He said people who knew who he was already were especially the worst. Breezing through, there's Bio Broly, where the antagonist is a mutated clone of Broly, who looks a lot like the giant god warrior from the end of the movie Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And also, the new characters in this movie, Hei, Men, Nain, and Dr. Kali, are all based on the Joji Abe book, Stubborn Guys Behind the Walls, which was a memoir of his time in prison while a member of the Yakuza, and was later adapted into a movie like right around the time of this movie. So they're, again, taking something that's in pop culture at the time. Fusion Reborn has a character called the Dictator, who escapes from hell and briefly causes havoc before being defeated by Gotenks. I could probably do an entire panel about how this character is taken out by an attack called the Super Ghost Kamikaze attack, but I'll just kind of leave that one where that is. In Wrath of the Dragon, there's the character Harudagarn. His name at least has a pretty fun origin. The movie's producer, Seiichi Hirata, was unhappy with the design of the character and demanded he be redrawn, and so the staff redrew him, and when they showed it to him, his jaw dropped. Gan is the sound for a jaw drop in Japanese, so this character made Haruta Gan, so he's Harudagan. So what does all this mean, really? Ultimately, it's for everyone to just decide whether or not there's anything good coming out of these movies. You might just say, hey, you just pointed out a bunch of references. You haven't really shown anything valuable. First of all, how dare you? Second of all, these are more just tenuous points of inspiration. I think they add color to the movies. They're not outright references. They don't detract from the experience. They kind of just give you like another springboard to think about them in a slightly different way. They're proof that if you dig around and look for things in here, you could find something more than just what's at the surface level. Does that mean that these movies are good? Yes. No. But I would argue that a lot of them are fun and entertaining romps. They're a great way to get into Dragon Ball and get like a little like hour-long dose of Dragon Ball without feeling like you're sucked into the whole franchise again, which can definitely happen. And then you lose like a week of your life rewatching all of Dragon Ball. Instead, you can throw on one of these movies and get like an hour. And I think there's some really good entertainment in them, especially we actually just recently recorded, it won't be out for a while, but we recorded a commentary on Dead Zone that has like one of the most awesome animated sequences when the character's like slicing at Goku with swords and he's dodging it. That's really beautiful animation. So with that, are there any questions even though I'm over time?
Nobody actually asked any questions at Anime Texas until after I had torn down, and then they came up and talked to me. So here is the Q&A for San Japan. I cleaned it up as best I could.
Why are they not canon? Mostly because Toriyama has nothing to do with them. Also, I personally would argue that canon is like borderline irrelevant when it comes to Dragon Ball. Once you get outside, I would tend to argue that once you get outside of the manga itself, just exactly, specifically, purely what Toriyama wrote in his original 42 chapters, 42 volumes, 450 some chapters, something like that. I'm not sure. Once you get outside of that, I would almost say nothing is canon. Or once you start trying to figure out what canon is outside of that, it becomes a soup sandwich very, very fast. What kind of unique facts? Oh, I got a bunch of unique facts that I know about Piccolo. You want to know my favorite little one? Do you know why he has 4 fingers in the manga and 5 in the anime? There's a There's a thing in Japan that's known as there's a social caste in Japan known as the Barakumin, and typically having fewer digits is seen as being a member of the Barakumin clan. This can be really controversial, actually. There's actually an Ishiro Honda movie called Half Human, which is about an abominable snowman, which features a depiction of the Barakumin people, and it's been another movie that's been under self-imposed ban by Toho for years. It's out there. You can find it. It's not hard to find, but like it was snuck out of Toho's vaults. So when they went to adapt Piccolo for the anime staff went, how about we just give him an extra finger so we can avoid ever having anyone argue that we are making any sort of inference to the most evil character in the entirety of the franchise up to this point be considered a member of the Barakumin. That's a fun little one. Do I have a least favorite for sure. From what I remember, and now it's probably been 20 years since I've watched anything after the Dead Zone. We actually just recorded a commentary on it. But from what I remember, I really don't like Bio Broly. Now for a favorite, I really like a lot of them. I personally am a big fan of Sleeping Princess and Devil's Castle. I think it looks neat. I think the story's really cool. I think it like serves really well as a movie unto itself without getting, like I really like Mystical Adventure. I think Mystical Adventure looks amazing, but the story is nonsense. And we, like I said, we just did this commentary for Dead Zone. Beautiful movie. Some of the best fight choreography in all of Dragon Ball. The scene where they're like swishing the swords and Goku's dodging them. Awesome, awesome stuff. But the story is like thinner than my laptop. So I'll stick with Sleeping Princess and Devil's Castle for now. Although I'm super keen to revisit Wrath of the Dragon and Fusion Reborn eventually, because those have over time become really well received by people. Probably. I mean, it sounds right. I would say yes. We'll just say yes. It's been 20 years since I've watched that movie, honestly. But I remember it being pretty fun. I think. I like kaiju, and he's like a kaiju, so that's good for me. Any other questions? Back there? Yeah. My favorite character in all of Dragon Ball? Okay, so I have to personally say it actually is Vegeta because I think I would be Vegeta. I think I'm awesome, and I'm not. I've got main character energy, but I'm not. But if I get outside of Goku and Vegeta, my favorite is Krillin. Actually, I got a thing for short, buff, bald guys who have hot wives. My least favorite character in all of Dragon Ball. See, I really like a lot of the characters. There's very few like hot take. I really like Emperor Pilaf. I think he's awesome. So do I? I'm not even sure if I have a least favorite character. Maybe, you know what I'll say? I'll say this. I'm not a huge fan of Oolong, but when I was reading the manga, the character that actually bugged me the most in the manga, and that I wound up, when we did the whole episode on her, saying I was kind of glad that Toriyama forgot her, was Launch. Because I think the joke gets old in a manga. I think it works just fine in an anime where like she can just sneeze back and forth and it can happen in 10, 20, 30 seconds. But when you're devoting like an entire page of a manga to it over and over and over, it gets a little stale. So I'll say Launch. So do I prefer the Japanese names or the English names? The English names. I don't got time to say all that stuff, right? Like It does make it charming. As a Godzilla fan, I'm used to some of that too. Like Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. That's actually the first Godzilla movie I ever saw. But its full name is like Godzilla, Mothra, Ebirah, Giant Battle in the Dual South Seas or something like that. And like it's just Sea Monster to me. So I prefer the English titles. I mean, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack. I just call that thing GMK because I got a life, man. I got 2 kids at home. I can't be taking 30 seconds to say the title of a thing. Vegeta's brother Tarble and his wife. He appears in our annual March Madness tournaments as the 16th seeded Saiyan always. He does not always lose the first round. So what do I think about him? I think it's kind of neat. Like, I love the idea of someone as much of a catty bitch as Vegeta having a brother who's like a little weakling who doesn't really want to fight and wants everyone to be friends. I think that's funny. Anything else? We're almost out of time, so one more? Sure. He served his purpose. Raditz served his purpose. He was there to expand the universe, to make Goku sort of rethink his origin and who he was, and that's it. Then they bring in better villains. And it's interesting because Toriyama actually said he never intended to keep Vegeta around. He was going to be a one-time villain and then drop him just like Raditz. But he kept saying that he was convenient to keep around. So I'm all for and always all for things that work best for the story, and I think Raditz served his purpose, and that's it. We'll do one more. Oh, would Goku still be a good guy if he lived in the United States in 2024? That's the question. No, I think so. I think that's actually this is a great question to go out on personally. That's what I love about Goku. Like, I mean, Vegeta's my favorite character because I identify with him, but as I get older, I love Goku more and more. It's the same reason that when I was younger, I loved Batman, and now I like Superman more and more. I really like the idea of a character who, despite having absolute power, is also absolutely good and absolutely incorruptible. I find that to be very inspiring, very uplifting. It's the sort of stuff we actually really need a lot more of. I really like, and I think it goes to Goku goes to West City when he's a child, and he comes out of that the same old Goku. He gets like fleeced by people. He gets like money. He gets all this stuff that like could tempt a normal person, and he still comes out the same old Goku. And so I think Goku, even if Goku lived in the nightmare fuel that is the 2020s, I think he would still be a very good person.
One more note from your editor here. This is our Q&A session from Fan Expo Denver. I really apologize for how this one sounds. I'm not afraid to do it at this point. I'll throw the panel before us under the bus and say they ran way over time. We were unable to get set up, and our recorder just never got a chance to get set up. So this is some pretty raw sounding audio. Bear with it, and thanks for listening.
It would definitely be one of the Z movies. I think the Dragon Ball movies have like just better animation in general a lot of times. So I would probably, if I could get one that would be remade, I'm going to say Bio Broly because I actually don't like it. And let's do another crack at that story, but maybe do it good this time. How about the little man right here? If I could have one move from Dragon Ball, what would it be?
Instant transmission.
Ooh.
No more commute. That's it right there.
I was going to say Final Flash because I'm a Vegeta fanboy, but
Well, we all know.
I mean that's like what a lot of the movies were doing, right? They would take what was either gonna come up in the show or what was going on in the show, because the whole idea was let's do something that people will see or something similar to this in the show, because that's where you get, hey, you've never seen Dragon Ball? Watch this. This is what's happening in the show right now. So now you can go, and it gets people excited to watch the show. So yes, it does feel like a proto Saiyan saga. What other movie character would I like to become canon? I'm gonna say Harudagon because I'm a kaiju movie fan and I like big monsters. And Cell Max didn't quite do it for me, so let's try. He's thinking about Hitler. He's thinking about the dictator.
No, probably. It's tough for me to come up with one. I'm thinking like Android 13, but at the same time, there's already been so many androids that are already part of the canon. It feels like overkill.
We've got one more, I think. Do I consider GT canon?
No.
I'm one of those people who I don't really care about canon in Dragon Ball. So like, if you consider it canon, I think great. If you don't, great. I just kind of approach each individual thing on its own and think whether I like it or not. And with GT, the answer is sometimes.
We're definitely going to be talking about it in the future, but it's one of those things that I feel like they were trying to go for a different tone and they just didn't quite nail it right. Like it could have been done better in execution, I think.
Do you got a follow-up? I think the theme of GT is good ideas done poorly, so I think you could absolutely do GT and make it good.
I particularly like the idea of the Black Star Dragon Balls as a storyline.
I'm not sure, but I'm super excited for it. It's going to be the last thing we ever get to see that Akira Toriyama himself actually worked on. And I just think that's really cool. I mean, everything that he's been directly involved in with Dragon Ball ever has been really, really good. And everything that he has not been directly involved in has been iffy at best. So I'm a little fearful for the future of the franchise, but I think Daima is going to be great. Oh, mine is Cell.
So I think it's tough to top that one.
You got another question back there? Yeah. Like doing one of the movies as like an arc, like a 13 episode arc or something of one of the movies. Oh, an attack. Are there non-canon attacks?
Yeah. I'd probably go with Dragon Punch just because like punching a hole through somebody is just, it's classic.
Little guy here. My favorite form. I am a Vegeta stan. There's no, I make no bones about that. So mine is Majin Vegeta all day, every day.
I like Orange Piccolo personally.
All right. I loved all of those questions, especially the ones that made me question whether I even know anything about Dragon Ball.
Some deep cuts in this crowd.
All right. Well, as I'm tearing down, feel free to come up. I've got a stack of business cards, or you can just scan that over there. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, throw us a rating, a review, whatever you do. I would appreciate it. And got shirts over here I can give out to you. And of course, I always like to end all of our shows on in a Dragon Ball fashion. So will I have more critical evaluations of the Dragon Ball movies we couldn't quite cover today? Find out next time and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bikini? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.